So we've made really good progress on our complex canopy design, but we have a few more finishing touches that I'd like to look at. First is we're going to add a family types parameter to control the bracket that we're using and allow us to swap in and out a simple and a more complex bracket. And we're also going to add a flip control so that we have a little bit more flexibility when we're placing the family and we can actually flip it relative to the wall, kind of like you would see in doors and windows when you're placing those. So let's start with the family types parameter. Here I have canopy step 4 if you're following along, or you can continue in your own file. So I'm going to select the bracket here and I'm going to edit the group that it's contained in. Now you may recall that when you create an array, that the array becomes a member of a group, and the group is how Revit is able to associate it parametrically. So groups, when you highlight them, have this little dash box around there. So we can just go ahead and select it, and that allows us to select the group. And then up here on the ribbon, we're going to see the Edit Group button. So I'm going to click on that, and that puts me in Group Edit mode. Now, when you're in Group Edit mode, Revit kind of tints the background with like a yellow color, and of course it shows this big Edit Group toolbar. So those are the two ways you can kind of tell you're in this mode. Now here's our complex bracket design over here, the one we prefer, but we've unfortunately become a victim of value engineering, and so we have to provide an option that's much simpler. So I'm going to select this, and I really don't want to just change the bracket completely. Like I could just choose it off the list here and be done with it, but I'm hoping I can convince the boss to stay with the complex one. So rather than just change it outright, I'm going to make it a parameter so that we can swap it in and out on the fly. Now you may recall at the start of this tutorial that we loaded in 2 versions of the bracket. We had bracket and bracket simple as families in this file. So I've got this one selected over here, and I'm just going to go up here to label, choose add parameter. And when I do it this way, Revit will figure out what type of object that is. It's a family type and it's specialty equipment. If you did it through the family types dialog, you'd have to choose the category off the list. And I'm going to choose bracket type for the name, decide what group I want to put it under, and it'll be a type-based parameter, and I'll click OK. Now, unfortunately, when I do this, Revit is going to generate an error, and unfortunately, these are the kind of errors you don't really like to see because they cannot be ignored. So some of these errors are relatively benign, and you can ignore them, or they give you a few possible remedies. This particular one, you have to deal with it before you can continue. Now, neither option that they're offering is really terribly great. You can either cancel, which basically stops the whole command dead in its tracks and we can't continue, or we can remove constraints. Now, the constraints in particular is you'll notice that it's highlighting our 2 bookends. So somehow Revit is not happy with the constraints that we applied to the bookends, the locking of our family to the reference plane. And, sometimes if you click expand, it tells you a little bit more information. And all it's really doing is confirming that the 2 reference planes are involved and the 2 specialty equipments and some dimensions that I can't really see in this view. So unfortunately, as I said, remove constraints is really the only way that we can continue. But what, of course, that's going to end up doing is when I finish the group, if I flex this family and I choose one of my other sizes, unfortunately, all of my brackets are going to be left behind here. Notice how they all are still flexing. You still have the right quantity, but they've all gotten kind of left behind. So here's the way that I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to go back to the 20 long. And that kind of gets everything back where it was. I'm going to select the first bookend at the end here. And I'm just going to move it off to the side. Then I'm going to select the next one and do the same thing. Basically go back to where we started from before these things were constrained. And then I'm going to just simply realign them. So I'm going to use my align tool, pick my reference plane, find my center line, lock that, reference plane, pick my center line, and lock that. Now that should do the trick. Sometimes you just need to reset things in order for Revit to be happy. Let's check it out. 30 long, apply, seems to be working. Let's try the 10 long, apply, seems to be working. So in this case, we fortunately just needed a reset and everything is now back to normal. Unfortunately, sometimes you won't be quite so lucky. So you'll get those error messages sometimes, and that's half the battle, is learning how to deal with them and walking through the steps to troubleshoot and try and figure out what it's going to take to get the family to start behaving again. Now, I want to add one last finishing touch to this before we complete it, and that is a flip control. This is sort of an optional feature, but it's a nice feature. If you remember that when you add doors and windows, they have those little double arrow flip controls. It makes it real easy to reverse the direction of the door. We can do the same kind of thing with this canopy family here so that we can easily flip it from one side of the wall to the other. So the control is right here on the Home tab, and you actually have several different versions. You can do vertical or horizontal ones, and the single control actually rotates, and the double control does more of a flip, does more of a mirror. So it's the double vertical that we want. And you don't get really any kind of indication from the mouse other than this little tooltip that says click to place the control. So I would prefer a cursor change of some kind, but just click and that will actually place the double arrow control. And be careful not to click a second time because it will actually create another control. Instead, just cancel out of the command or click the modify tool to complete it. And so the final step is just save the family, and then we'll be ready to load it into a project to test it out. And we'll do that in the next movie.